Nikadesh, Nikadesh, Nikadesh et Shimecha ba'olam, Nikadesh et Shimecha ba'olam, Keshem shemakdishim oto b'shmei marom, kakatuv ayad neviecha v'karaser ze ve'amar. Adir, Adireinu, Adir, Adireinu, Adonai, Adonai, Adoneinu, Ma'adir, Ma'adir, Shimcha b'chol haaretz. Echad hu Eloheinu, hu Avinu, hu Malkeinu, hu Moshienu, vehu Yashmienu, vehu Yashmienu, vehu Yashmienu, berachamav, berachamav, le'nei kol chai. Ledor vador, ledor vador, ledor vador nagid kol lecha. Ledor vador, ledor vador, ledor vador nagid kol lecha. Ulenetzach netzachim, kedushatcha naqdish, kedushatcha naqdish, v'shivchacha Eloheinu, mipinu lo yamush, le'olam, le'olam va'ed. Ledor vador nagid kol lecha. Ledor vador nagid kol lecha. Ulenetzach netzachim, kedushatcha naqdish, kedushatcha naqdish, v'shivchacha Eloheinu, mipinu lo yamush, le'olam, le'olam va'ed.
Earlier this year, Joni was shopping in Publix, and she reported to me this incident. And I actually shared it with a few of our congregants one Shabbat, but I wanted to share it with all of you because it kind of sets a tone that I think I wanted to establish here. It happened, she was there, and this older couple came in. He was in a wheelchair, and the woman was shopping, and they got separated a little bit. And Joni happened to be in the aisle when the woman fell and actually broke her arm. And she happened to have 2 jars of beet juice, beets in her hand. So on the floor was beet and blood, and she was, down there, and people were trying to help her. But at that moment, the woman shouted out, "Morris, Morris!" Obviously, her husband in the wheelchair. Morris started wheeling over in the wheelchair, and she said, "Morris, where were you? I looked for you, and now see what happened." But the real line is what Morris said to her as he slowly wheeled over. "I know, my dear, it's my fault. I'm sorry." That actually happened. Joni told me. She saw it. Now, as cliche as it sounds, we say, happy wife, happy life. And in that case, Morris obviously had arrived at a conclusion that no matter what happened, it was his fault, and it's better to keep peace in the home than to argue about that moment. Jonathan Simons from England sends me clippings, and there was one he shared with me this year about a couple that's been married 80 years. They're both over 100. They've been married 80 years. And the headline, it's Maurice and Helen Kay, and the headline was a quote from Maurice: "The secret of our 80-year marriage, I agree with everything she says." So that was the headline of the article. But we all know that life just isn't as simple as that. And in fact, the article goes on to tell us that during World War II, in the Blitz, their home was destroyed. And then it tells us that a 4-year-old son of theirs died of a burst appendix, and a 30-year-old daughter of theirs died of a brain tumor. So obviously, it wasn't just simple in life. Life is complicated. It has not only the good parts, but the bad parts as well. But the real secret was given by Helen Kay, because this was the quote in the article from the woman, the wife. "It's been hard work, and not without tragedy, but we've had so many good moments together. You mustn't be hard on each other. And if you have to give a little bit, you give a little bit." I think she understands what I'm going to try and convey today. A lot of it has to do with how we look at life. There's no simple formula for a good relationship or even a good life, but hard work, focusing on good moments, and finding ways to compromise is one way of going. I want you to know I struggled with this sermon. I've known for some time that I'm going to be speaking about Gaza on Yom Kippur morning, and my thoughts about what's been going on there and our people's struggle, and somewhat about the anti-Semitism as well rising in Europe. And I knew that on Kol Nidre I'd be focusing on the notion of transforming our lives and change in our lives through the 25 years of devoted service that Cantor Stephen Haas has given to this congregation, and on commemoration of his becoming our Cantor Emeritus. But this sermon has been very difficult for me. And I want you to know that even as I'm delivering it, I'm not really 100% clear that I understand and know how to give this message to you at this time. But I want to share these thoughts with you, and part of it has to do with some of the calls that I've been making and the way you have been expressing yourself. There's a lot of fear and a lot of dismay and a lot of hopelessness that I hear about looking at the world and the prospects for the future. There was an op-ed piece from Dr. Deborah Lipstadt in the New York Times where she quoted that famous Jewish joke about a Jewish telegram. Those of you remember what a telegram is? Everybody here? Explain it to your kids. They probably don't know. Jewish telegram reads as follows: "Start worrying, details to follow." It is, in fact, traditional for Jews to worry. We call ourselves the ever-dying people. We always think we're dying. We always think it's bad. Always, no matter when it is. I'm going to try and convince you that it's not bad right now. Now, I would argue that today, I want you to realize that this is not a Pollyannish kind of statement. I understand there are real crises in the world, and that we must face them, and we must do something about them. I believe there has never been an era in history without real crises, and that every era has had threats and fear as a part of that era. And I'll point some of that out. But I do believe as well that this is the best time for any Jew, any human being to be living. And there is no better time in all of history than the time we're living in now. Not as a Jew, not as an American, not as a human being. So let me remind you a little, some of you who don't know my own journey. When I became a rabbi, I went to UCLA to become an actor. I majored in theater arts, and for the first 2 years, I was in their conservatory doing, as my father said, sandbox. He was not so thrilled with me going to college and studying acting, but I did. And I found out a competent character actor. I actually got cast over and over in major productions throughout those first 2 years. But during my junior year, I decided, after some thought and investigation, I wanted to be a rabbi. My professors in theater arts were not happy with me. They felt they were investing a lot of time in me and that I was talented enough to work in the field, and they were not happy that I had chosen to complete my studies in theater arts, but then to go into the rabbinate. And people would ask me over and over again, why? Why are you doing this? Why are you leaving theater arts? And why are you going to study for 5 more years after college to go into this thing called the rabbinate? And I had an answer at the time. The answer at the time, I was young, and this is what I thought. I said, I really want to touch the lives of people in a personal way, and I want to change the world. Now, a lot of that had to do with the time that I went to high school and college. I graduated high school in 1965, college in 1969. Many of you remember those dark days. We were in the midst of the Cold War, in the midst of Vietnam, the civil rights movement, the feminist movement. There was black power rising in the inner city, and there were riots, including in Miami. It was a dark time, and there were many Americans like today who were without hope. The Cold War was overshadowing everything in the world. Communism was on the rise and was fighting for the heart of Europe at that time. Israel was struggling to survive, and I mean struggling, trying to absorb millions of immigrants from all over the world, struggling with an economy that was failing. Now, some of my friends escaped to drugs, to uppers, downers, pot, heroin, LSD. Some of my friends left, went to Canada, Europe, even to Israel to avoid the draft or just to escape the chaos they felt here. I was in demonstrations during those times. I remember being clubbed by a policeman in one of those demonstrations. Some of my friends died in Vietnam, and some returned traumatized. There were the assassinations of the 60s that shaped that era. President Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers. The times have changed. The issues are different, but many feel disheartened by the shape of the world. We live in the wake of constant news stories that make it hard for us to see hope. Every tragedy in the world is reported. Every particular violent incident is over and over and over shown, especially on CNN, over every detail. Even when there's nothing to report, we keep hearing it over and over. We feel uncertain, and it looks like there's terror everywhere, and it is hopeless. We worry about our children, that they won't have the kind of world we had, and it won't be better than the world that we inherited. And we fear about our own stability here at home. We have concerns about freedoms, both within and without. Now I've completed 40 years as a rabbi, 29 of them here at Beth Shalom. And I now have a better idea why I really went into the rabbinate. It took me time, but I understand it in retrospect. Theater arts and theater itself focuses by and large on the pain and the loss and the trauma of life. Even comedies are about foibles that human beings have. They're about our weaknesses. I became a rabbi because I recognized that in the Jewish tradition, There is always hope. There is always light, and there is always joy. One just has to look. One just has to find it. That our tradition teaches that. Yes, Jews worry, but Judaism teaches hope and light and joy, always. I needed to find a way to learn that and to touch it. My struggle this morning is how to share the way I see the world with you in these few words. So I'm going to start with a few examples that give me a sense of hope. It says in Pirkei Avot, the way to live is with an ayin tovah, a good eye, and a lev tov, a good heart. And one of the rabbis taught, what does it mean to have a good eye? It means I trained my right eye to see correctly. We have to train our eyes to see correctly, to see the real world. Not just what we see on CNN, not just what we read in the headlines, but we need to see the real world as it exists. Last night I quoted a poem from Tuvia Rubner, a Holocaust survivor who lost virtually all of his family and became a wonderful Israeli poet. And let me read you one of his poems, because some of his poems are very dark about his pain. But again, he writes this, even out of his loss and pain of the Holocaust. He writes this: if after everything that has happened, you can still hear the blackbird, the tufted lark at dawn, the bulbul, the honeybird, don't be surprised that happiness is watching the clouds being wind carried away, is drinking morning coffee, being able to execute all the body's needs, is walking along the path without a cane and seeing the burning colors of sunset. A human being can bear almost everything, and no one knows when and where happiness will overcome him. If a Holocaust survivor can see happiness and joy, we can certainly find a way to it ourselves. We have to train our eyes and our souls to see, to have perspective. I was told from a friend about his father. His father never really was close to his children, never was close to his grandchildren, liked to party and socialize, didn't really like to be involved in family. And then the father got a prognosis of the fact that he was dying. And at that moment, suddenly, his family, his son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren rallied around him. Even though he hadn't been in their lives, they rallied around him. They were with him all the time, reading to him, encouraging him, being a part of his life. And at one moment, he pulled his daughter-in-law aside. He couldn't say it to his son, but he pulled his daughter-in-law aside, and he said, I never realized what I had. That's when we don't really look at the world. We miss the world that we actually have. We need to train ourselves, our minds, our hearts, our souls, to have the real perspective of what life is. This past year, there was a rabbinic family whose son was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, very bad case. And they actually called him Superman Sam, and they asked people to shave their heads to raise money for leukemia. Didn't work as well as the pouring ice on the head, but it raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to try and fight pediatric cancer. And at a certain point, Sam was no longer able to be treated and had to go into palliative care. And he was told that. And when he was told that, he wrote this poem. He was 8 years old. I don't want to die. I want to grow up and marry someone. I want to drive. I want to have a bar mitzvah. I want to see David, Sammy's older brother, become president. I want to see Dad get old and wear diapers. How will you live without me? How will David and Yael and Sally live without me? How will I live without you? What will I do without you? Where will I be? You're going to put me in a box and put me in the ground. I'll never get to do all the things I want to do. Why did I have to get cancer when I was just a kid before I got to do things? I want to do something amazing. And his mother, reading these words, sat with her son and said, Sammy, you already have. You're amazing. Sammy died in December this past year. But his parents found a way through their pain to do something that was amazing, that helped others because they couldn't help their son. I think of families in this congregation who've lost children. This past year, Calder Sloan, and how his parents are trying to save other kids by making the water, the pools safe for them. I think of David Dubrow, young man who loved his trip to Israel, and his parents have made it possible for those who can't afford it to go to Israel through the congregation. Think of Jennifer Turkin, whose parents have made it possible now for students to do the right thing and be honored for it, to see the world through perspective, to remember what life is all about. The Torah says in the Ve'ahavta, these words I command you this day shall be upon your heart. And the rabbi said it should say in your heart. Why does it say upon? And the answer is the word should be there so that when your heart breaks, the words fall in and give you comfort. I guess it's true. What's the best way to live? With a good eye and a good heart. The world is a broken place. That's what our tradition says. That's why we have Tikkun Olam, to repair it. That's why you and I are here, to do something about it. Not to despair, not to fear, but to look at it with the right eyes and to do something about it. We, Jewish people, we have hope because we've lived through the cauldron of history, because they couldn't kill us entirely. They tried. In the Holocaust, a third of us died, but we built the state of Israel. We are a strong diaspora everywhere. Right after that Holocaust, we did these things because we don't give up, we don't despair, and we don't fear. So why now? Why is it despairing now? Why do we worry now? I would argue this is exactly the moment to celebrate where we are and to fix what we need to fix, and not to be afraid, but to live our lives the way we are intended to live it, the way our tradition demands that we live it. Now, I'm not talking about just being blindly optimistic. In the book called The Anatomy of Hope, Jerome Groopman defines hope as opposed to optimism. Many of us confuse hope with optimism, a prevailing attitude that things will turn out for the best. But hope differs from optimism. Hope does not arise from being told to think positively or from hearing an overly rosy forecast. Hope, unlike optimism, is rooted in unalloyed reality. Hope is the elevating feeling we experience when we see in the mind's eye a path to a better future. Hope acknowledges the significant obstacles and deep pitfalls along the way. True hope has no room for delusion. I have no delusions, but I do hope, and our tradition asks us to hope. And I ask you to look at the facts. Look at the world today. During World War II, in the memory of many who were here, about 60 million people were killed during that war. In the entire Syria civil war, 200,000 have died. War today is not what war was. War was total destruction of entire cities, of entire peoples. Today, there is some control. But if you don't buy that, think of the threat. We have the threat of ISIS today. ISIS is a threat, and we need to focus on it, and we are. But in the previous period of the Cold War, the possibility was entire world destruction by nuclear weapons. Remember? Is the fear greater today? Would you rather be back then? Would you rather fear total nuclear destruction than fighting ISIS as we are now, or in any way that we'll have to? And how about in every other field? In health, during World War I, Spanish flu alone killed almost 100 million people, 500,000 in America. We have flu shots today. We worry because there are 2,000 cases of Ebola, and we're dealing with it. Health organizations are working on it. 100 million died of flu. Would you rather be back in those days with the health issues then? And if you want to look at other things, starvation is an issue. It remains a problem. Rabbi Pomerantz spoke about it last night, and our Justice Network is working on it. But in 1933, in 2 years, 10 million Ukrainians starved to death. In 2 years, in one little place in the world. Everywhere we've made progress. All forms in America of crime are down at a 50-year low. And if you look at issues like domestic abuse and slavery and children's rights and women's rights, they're now open subjects. We're actually talking about them. Would any woman want to go back and have her status in the year 1900 or the year 1960 instead of what a woman has today? We've made progress. Things are better today. And Freedom House has been since 1973 looking at the nations of the world. In 1973, they estimated that all countries who were either free or mostly free was 54% of the nations of the world. Today, it's over 75%. These are objective facts. The world is better. The threats are less. We have overcome far worse. And what about as Jews? Do we really want to go back? We're presently living in the golden age of our people's history. We've never, ever in our history of 4,000 years had a nation as strong as Israel, and we've never had a diaspora as strong as the diaspora in America. Never. And I've studied history. And I'll be happy to go over it with you. 1942, we had no one to defend us. Today we have the IDF, one of the greatest military forces in the world. We have the Iron Dome that saved hundreds and maybe thousands of lives, and the technology that's there. We have AIPAC, which produced the Iron Dome with the help, obviously, of Congress and of the administration. We have the ADL. We have federations. We are organized. We are on the lookout for these things. None of us would want to go back then. In 1973, in the Yom Kippur War, in less than a month, 3,000 Israeli soldiers were killed. In this war, longer than that, 66 were killed. Do we want to go back? Do we think things are worse today than they were before? And I would argue with anyone that this is the golden age for Judaism. In the latest survey in America, the most respected religion, #1, is Judaism in America. And that is everywhere. Judaism. Now, it's hard for us to hear this because we worry. So, Rabbi, I hear you, but how do I change what I'm thinking? Because I'm still thinking I'm worried. So I'm going to recommend a book for you. It's a book called The Happiness Hypothesis by Professor Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T. It's really a wonderful, readable book, and it will help you to move yourself. Now, Haidt, what he does is he uses all of the studies that have come out about the mind and about the body and about the way we function together. He uses a metaphor. He says, basically, and I want to read it, the metaphor is an elephant. We are like an elephant with a small rider on top. The rider is our intellect. The elephant is our kishkas, right? What we're born with, what we have inherent in us. He says the rider is an advisor or servant, not a king, president, or charioteer with a firm grip on the reins. The elephant, in contrast, is everything else. Gut feelings, visceral. The elephant and the rider each have their own intelligence. When they work together well, they enable the unique brilliance of human beings. Now, the book is very readable, and it gives 3 ways that we can change what it is we do. But I want to give you the core idea. The core idea is that we need to deepen and widen our relationships, because ultimately that is where we get hope. It is not in the big picture, it's in the little picture. It's what he calls between. He writes, happiness comes from between. It comes from getting the right relationships between yourself and others, yourself and your work, and yourself and something larger than yourself. And he says that the best way to do this is through involvement in social networks, meaning not technology, but real social contact, and through religious faith and practice. And that you will find here, and we welcome you to be a part of it. So I welcome you to come to those circles. I learned a lot from studying Jewish history. Come to Melton, come to Adult B'nai Study. Learn and you will find. And stop listening to CNN all the time. Stop listening to Fox News. Stop listening 24/7. Don't let it come into you with some kind of news flash. Do you know, we don't need to know immediately when everything happens. You know, some of you may not remember this, but in 1973, when Yom Kippur War broke out on Yom Kippur, and there was no internet and no cell phones, somehow everyone in the Jewish world found out about it that day in synagogue. How is that possible? Without cell phones, without texting. Because it was important, and people found out by word of mouth, by people driving to synagogue and letting people know. Even in Israel, where they were in synagogue, they found out. But we found out. I was in Piqua, Ohio, and I found out on that day during services. We don't need to hear it all the time. That feeds our fear. We need to feed our hope and not our fear. So that's one. Helping others is another way because it makes us feel good. So research shows that the quality of social relationships, of helping, of being involved, is a strong deterrent to being negative and being afraid. I think also we should recognize that if we're going to spend our money, we should not spend it so much on things, but on experiences. Things pass. The newness of things wears off fairly quickly. But experiences we carry our whole lives. They change us. We feel wonderful. Don't you remember wonderful vacations, wonderful times that you spent with people you loved? Even after you've forgotten that shoe that you wanted to buy and how wonderful it was for a little while until your feet started hurting? And he says, look at the little things. Don't sweat them, but do the little things more often. And don't worry about the big things so much. This is a big thing. Shabbos is every week. Do the little things. Do something for yourself every Shabbos, even if you don't come here. Albert Einstein said, it's one of my favorite quotes, not everything you can count counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. I love that notion. We have to remember what truly counts. Life is about quality, not quantity. So I became a rabbi because in my kishkas, I wanted hope, and I needed to find it. And I trained myself over the years, my eye, my heart, and my soul, to see the hope, to see the joy, and to see the light. And I invite you to join me. And I'm happy to have the conversation with you because you and I matter in the scheme of things. That's at the core of being Jewish. We believe that God put us here because we matter. We make a difference. We can change the world. You and I, every one of us here. So I ask you to hope. I ask you to find hope. I ask you to train yourself to hope and to see the light and to see the joy. May this new year, 5775, be for you and all those you love. A year when your heart will be open to hope and light and joy. That is the core of human existence. And may this be a year where you build up your writer's strength in order to move your elephant in the right direction. Ken Yiratzon. L'shana tova teikatevu. May you have a good year.